Hello, everybody. This video is about the last scene of Hamlet, which is Act 5, Scene 2. Act 5, Scene 2 is the final act of Hamlet. There is a lot of activity in this act, but whereas throughout much of the play, Hamlet had been the rambunctious force of disruption and chaos, here in this final act, he serves as the calm center for a flurry of activity that takes place around him. And then, by the end of the act, he continues to center the action in the form of a dead body. Let's take a look at what happens. The scene opens with Hamlet telling Horatio about a little trick he played on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern before he was abducted by pirates. Hamlet explains that he had a kind of strange feeling that kept him up at night. Some kind of instinct prompted him to snoop through Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's things to find the letter Claudius had given them to take to the King of England. The letter is supposed to just say, "Please take care of my crazy nephew for a while." But instead, as Hamlet is not too surprised to see, it says, "Please cut off my nephew's head as soon as you read this letter." Hamlet is a very good writer, so it's easy for him to forge a different letter that says, "Please cut off Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's heads as soon as you get this letter." Hamlet has his father's ring, which he needs to apply the royal seal to the letter to ensure its authenticity, and he swaps the forged letter for the real one. Then he is kidnapped by pirates. Hamlet feels no remorse for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who may or may not have known that they were delivering Hamlet up for execution. In fact, Hamlet narrates his exploit with a detail and energy that shows how proud he is of himself for his forethought and cunning. He even goes so far as to suggest that it was God's plan that things work out the way they did. "There's a divinity that shapes our ends," he says, "rough hew them how we will," meaning that humans carve out the rough shape of their lives through free will, but fate or God or some cosmic force puts on the final touches. As a fictional character, this is also the case for Hamlet, whose God is Shakespeare, shaping the rough material of the Hamlet narrative into the words of the play. God/Shakespeare didn't want Hamlet to die off stage in England, but that doesn't mean he doesn't want him to die at all. Hamlet seems to recognize this in some way, which may explain why, as crafty and anticipatory as Hamlet had been in swapping Claudius's letter, it is strange how numbly he seems to walk right into Claudius and Laertes' trap. Osric, a foppish dandy of the Elsinore court, arrives to share some exciting news with Hamlet. Claudius has made a bet with Laertes that in a fencing match between them, Laertes will hit Hamlet no more than 3 times more than Hamlet hits Laertes over the course of 12 rounds. The insinuation is that Laertes is better at fencing, but Claudius will bet on Hamlet with a handicap and try to cover the spread. Hamlet and Horatio have a good time making fun of Osric, who is such a creature of courtly elegance that he can barely think for himself or say anything original. But Hamlet's teasing of Osric is much less hateful than his dressing down of the play's other fools, Polonius, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern, and even, one hates to include, Ophelia. And it almost seems as if Hamlet's mind is elsewhere. When Osric informs Hamlet that the uncle who just tried to have him killed and the angry bereaved son and brother who just promised that he would kill him have invited him to a friendly game of thrusting sharp objects at each other, Hamlet seems to consider it just a fun, ordinary way of passing the time. The Hamlet who had boasted about his ability to read his enemies' thoughts and contrive to sabotage their plots against him seems to have mellowed out into a kind of sleepwalking fatalist. Hamlet confesses to Horatio that he has some dim misgivings about the fencing match, and Horatio urges him to decline to participate, but Hamlet overrules him. "There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow," he says. "If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man, of aught he leaves, knows what is it to leave betimes, let be." In the book of Matthew, it says that God is alert to the death of every sparrow, that his care and wisdom saturate all of life, and that everything that happens, even death, is part of his benevolent love. Hamlet philosophizes that things are going to happen sooner or later anyway, so all human beings can do is to prepare themselves psychologically for whatever fate the universe has in store for them. Furthermore, since nobody knows what it's like to be dead, there's no point in being scared of death or trying to resist it. Obviously, Hamlet's words and actions here seem to contradict not only his earlier resistance to Claudius's machinations, but also his anguished indecision about the question of suicide in the to be or not to be speech, as well as his vengeful resolution in the soliloquies he spoke in response to the Player King's speech and the sight of Fortinbras's army. What's happened to Hamlet? Has he grown up? Has he achieved a grim but serene wisdom as a result of his experiences? Did his departure from the play in Act 4 allow him to return with a new perspective? Is it a kind of Beowulf thing, whereas the fateful moment of death approaches, our hero becomes more reflective and introspective? Did Hamlet's broodings in the graveyard scene about the futility of life and the inevitability of death convince him that the difference between life and death isn't worth fretting about? Is he depressed about the death of Ophelia? And does he even blame himself on some level for failing to save her from the fate of Ophelia? Or is it that he accepts that he's a certain fictional character named Hamlet in a certain tragic play called Hamlet, and so it is his comic duty to offer himself up for human sacrifice in the final scene, to give the people what they want, and maybe even, through his death, to exorcise some sin in our human community? Or is it something else that nobody has ever thought of before? Hamlet and Laertes share a formal exchange of greetings. Hamlet kind of apologizes for wronging Laertes, although he doesn't specifically say stabbing your dad and verbally abusing your sister, but he blames it on his madness, which makes one wonder if maybe Hamlet recognizes that he had been mad, but the journey halfway to England really has allowed him to recover his wits to some extent. Laertes responds frostily, and Claudius merrily sets out a cup of wine for Hamlet to drink from, containing a lovely and totally not poisoned pearl. Hamlet turns out to be really good at fencing, and he gets one hit on Laertes. Claudius is like, "Great job, Hamlet. Why not have a drink?" Hamlet declines and then gets a second hit on Laertes. Gertrude is so proud of her son that she takes a big gulp from Hamlet's wine cup, even as Claudius warns her not to. Laertes and Hamlet fight for a third round, but this time it's a draw. Frustrated with how long it's taking to kill Hamlet, Laertes stabs him during the timeout. This makes Hamlet angry, and the two fight. Hamlet picks up Laertes' sword, which of course is poisoned, and stabs him with it. Laertes, realizing he's going to die, confesses to Hamlet about the poisoned sword and the poisoned drink. Laertes recognizes that Hamlet has indeed caught him in his own trap, just as Hamlet had swapped fates with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but now it's too late for Hamlet too. Sword poison is so deadly that there's no medicine that can save you, and the lethality rate is 100%. Meanwhile, Gertrude drops dead. With his dying words, Laertes says that Hamlet is not to blame for all the death and horror. It's all Claudius's fault. Eh, on one hand, it's true. Claudius's original act of murdering his brother set in motion all the events that led to the deaths of Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, Laertes, and Gertrude, and soon Hamlet himself. On the other hand, Laertes' attempt to confine the sin of Elsinore to one bad actor seems overly simplistic and counter to a more pervasive sense throughout the play that Claudius might be the most evil person in the cast, but he has no monopoly on violent and destructive behavior. Anyway, Hamlet finally has the tools and the opportunity and the motivation to do the thing that he has been pledging to do since Act 1. He stabs Claudius with the poisoned sword and then force feeds him the poisoned wine. Then Hamlet gets a minute or two to live in the space between to be and not to be. He's as good as dead, but he can still talk, which allows him to pivot temporarily on both sides of the grave. Hamlet wants everybody to know that he has an amazing story to tell, that the story of his life, when told, will shock people, amaze them, horrify them. It may even become one of the most famous stories ever told. It might still be talked about and wondered at 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now. But Hamlet is dying. He doesn't have time to tell his story. It's too late for him. I wonder if this is how a lot of people feel when they're dying, that they don't have time to communicate what their life has meant, who they were, what life has taught them. We have to die in order to see the complete shape of our life, but in the act of dying, we lose the opportunity to pass on that insight. Fortunately, Hamlet has his best friend, Horatio. Horatio is so distraught by Hamlet's death that he wants to drink the poisoned wine too and kill himself. But Hamlet pleads with him to stay alive. Life may be full of pain and anguish, Hamlet tells Horatio, but please, try to bear it for at least a little while longer. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, he tells Horatio, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. Just as Hamlet is dying, the castle Elsinore is suddenly intruded upon by two parties. One party is the army of Fortinbras, who is passing back through Denmark following Fortinbras's successful war against the Poles. Fortinbras was just stopping by to say hi to the king and thank him for letting his army pass through Denmark, and he is surprised to find that the king and queen and prince are all lying dead in their own castle. Hamlet tells Horatio to tell Fortinbras that he can be the new king of Denmark if he wants to, and then Hamlet dies, uttering the immortal words, "The rest is silence." But it's not really, because the business of life has to continue on, noisily and garrulously. Fortinbras has to express his horror at encountering such a tragic spectacle. The second party that arrives to Elsinore in the final minutes of the play consists of ambassadors from England, who have also stopped by to deliver the news to the king, or whoever is still left alive to hear it, that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. The absurdity of this line is richly, darkly comic. Here is the whole royal family of Denmark sprawled dead after having all killed each other, and the message that these meaningless characters have been executed off stage as a result of Hamlet's forged letter prank falls on their dead ears as a final comic gesture on the part of death, maybe reminding us that great people and insignificant people all share the same fate. And of course, Horatio has to tell Hamlet's story. Fortinbras agrees to assemble an audience so that they can hear what Horatio has to say. In a final irony, Fortinbras orders that Hamlet, a figure of indecision, independence, and creative disruptionism, receive a military funeral. Meanwhile, Horatio, most likely, is trying to figure out how to start telling Hamlet's story. He is probably thinking, Act 1, Scene 1. Enter Bernardo and Francisco, two sentinels. Bernardo. Who's there?